Malcolm Turnbull, welcome to Full Story.
Yeah, great to be with you, Nour.
You've described the coalition as a smouldering wreckage. That doesn't really invoke an image of something that can be salvaged or repaired. Do you think the Liberals and the Nationals can reunite, and what will that take?
Well, it's up to them, right? So, of course, they can reunite, and if they want to be an effective opposition and an alternative government, they should reunite. But yeah, I'm not close enough to the internals to be able to say what would enable them to do that.
This is the second split in 8 months. Who, in your view, is responsible for that?
Well, the answer is both sides, obviously. I think that Sussan Ley brought a lot of this grief on herself most recently by the very regrettable way she, responded to the Bondi massacre. Her initial reaction was on the night was positive, collaborative, supportive of the government, exactly what she should have said. But by the next morning, she was swept up in this sort of right-wing media outrage cycle. And she and her colleagues started attacking Albanese and blaming the government for the attack, which was disgraceful and wrong. I mean, just simply factually wrong. And anyone who had any familiarity with national security, and she does, would have known it was wrong. So they then pressured Albanese first to have the Royal Commission to bring back Parliament, to introduce legislation. So he was bustled to bring the Parliament back in a screaming hurry to introduce legislation which really deserves much more careful consideration in a rush. And what were the topics of that legislation? Guns, absolutely combustible issue with the National Party and the regional Libs in particular, and of course hate speech or limiting speech to, prevent hate speech, which again, and Sussan understands the history of this. She was there, which has always been a combustible issue within the coalition parties. So it's hardly surprising that they blew up over it. But if she had taken the same approach Kelly Sloan did in New South Wales and supported the government, said we'll work through it together, she'd taken the same approach Kim Beazley did after the Port Arthur massacre, this wouldn't have happened. So, Sussan's been portrayed as very much the victim of the, unreasonable David Littleproud, and I'm not suggesting he's without fault or blame or blemish. Plenty of blame to go around. But this situation was created by the opposition, and Sussan in particular, taking what should have been a bipartisan moment of national unity and turning it into a very partisan political fight.
Do you think the Liberal Party was right to support the hate speech laws, which some had criticised for the pace at which they moved through the Parliament and for potentially curtailing or chilling free speech?
Well, look, it's all a question of degree. I think in the political circumstances they are in, they, I can understand why they supported them, but there is, we do have hate speech laws. No, I mean, let's be frank, and the problem has been that they have not been sufficiently enforced. But that type of legislation, in my view, deserves much more careful consideration. There's nothing in these laws that have been passed that would have prevented these assassins committing those crimes. Um, so, we've got to be honest about that. These lone wolf assailants are very, very hard to identify and very, very hard to prevent. The security agencies get most of them, but as I said at the time, the agencies have got to be right 100% of the time. The terrorists have only got to achieve their objective once. Uh, you know,
On the way that Sussan Ley handled the Nationals' response, was her fatal error accepting the resignation of those three senators?
Depends what you mean by fatal error. It's a question of judgment. I've had my difficulties managing the coalition myself. It is herding cats is unfair to cats, right? So it is really, really difficult. So I have sympathy for her on that score. But given the situation she'd got herself into, bustling the government into coming back and rushing legislation, which I'm sure was not Albanese's first wish, right? He was responding to political pressure. But you have, that's life, that's politics. Given that situation, she would have been better off allowing the Nationals to vote differently. And I mean, people talk about cabinet solidarity. I mean, that's not a cabinet, it's the shadow cabinet, okay? So it would have been perfectly feasible to say, okay, on this issue, the Nats are going to vote a different way to us, but we're making an exception to this in these special circumstances. Would it have looked ugly? Yes. Would it have been criticised? Yes. But would it have been less ugly and less, catastrophic than blowing up the coalition again? So
A lot of people have remarked that there's something bigger at play here. If the coalition does reunite, that won't resolve the deepening divide between the diminishing moderates in the Liberal Party and those who increasingly appear to be courting the One Nation vote. Is there a way to overcome that?
yes, there is a way to overcome it, but it's very hard. I mean, the Liberal National Party in Queensland and the National Party in general have, in my experience, always been more concerned about being outflanked on the right by people like One Nation or Palmer or Katter or whoever than they have been worried about the Labor Party.
But it's not just the Nats.
No. I said the Liberal National Party in Queensland, which, as you know, is the Liberal Party and National Party combined. So, yes, no, you're absolutely right. So this is an anxiety. I think what has happened, and it was a problem I had to manage. I mean, my political problems are overwhelmingly from within my own ranks, from the right wing, who are essentially living in a right wing echo chamber, Sky News, right wing shock jocks, Murdoch media, and that has pulled the party further and further to the right, further and further away from the centre of Australian politics. And so instead of focusing on the issues of concern to most Australians, which are overwhelmingly, the economy, health, education, housing affordability, the environment, and so forth, they're running off on culture war issues. And yeah, so that is a real problem. As you said, there are very few moderates left. You're absolutely right. I mean, Jason Falinski was speaking on the radio this morning, making the point that he feels the Nats have been chasing after Hanson, and I think that's true. Making the point that he thinks that they'd be better off apart for a while. That's true. But I mean, Jason lost his seat to a Teal independent, Sophie Scomps, who ran on a centrist, small L Liberal ticket. Okay. And so he lost, even though he would style himself as a moderate, he lost because he was seen as being part of a party that was too right wing. Now, this has been a catastrophe for the Liberals. So they've lost most of their safest urban seats now to small L Liberal independents.
I'm glad you brought up Jason Falinski because late last year there was some chatter about a new centre-right movement that would bring together some small L Liberals and potentially Teals. Is that the only way for the Liberals to win back some of that ground that you mentioned in the cities, to not only split from the Nationals, but to divorce from the hard right of the Liberal Party?
Well, I think it's not the only way, but there definitely is a market there for a genuinely liberal, small L Liberal, centre-right party. There absolutely is. I mean, the Teals are an example of that. That's why, you know, uh, I'm sure some people who voted for the Teals voted because they like to have feisty independents as their members. But I think the main reason they voted for them was because the politics, that sort of centrist, progressive, liberal with a small L politics, appealed to them. I think that's where most Australians are. That's my view. The media, well, not the right wing media, has become very polarised. The and they're creating an alternate reality. And the longer the Liberal Party and the National Party think that what they read in the Australian and what they see on Sky News is reality, they will, the more irrelevant they'll be. I mean, one of the Labor Party cabinet ministers said to me the other day, he said, the best thing that has ever happened to the Australian Labor Party is Sky News. And he said they've just dragged the Liberal Party off into this, crazy zone, which this is where Dutton resided there, right? That was literally was his happy place. But the problem is it isn't where the majority of Australians are. And we have compulsory voting and preferential voting, both of which pull our politics to the centre.
Has anyone or have people contacted you about this new movement?
Well, there are people, everyone's talking about it. I mean, I'm still a member of the Liberal Party, although there are regular calls for me to be expelled, but that hasn't happened yet. But mind you, there are some people in the Liberal Party that were calling for me to be expelled when I was the Liberal Prime Minister. So just to give you an idea of some of the craziness there. But look, I think there's people talking about it, but the initiative would really have to come, I think, from the Teals, because they're in the Parliament, and they've got to, they'd have to. I think it would be, look, to be honest, I think it would be healthy if we had a more effective opposition. At the moment, we don't. You need, in our system, you need to have a viable opposition. You really do. And of course, you need independents and you need smaller parties. But if the government feels that it is invincible, you don't want to, I mean, just think of Donald Trump. Remember when Donald Trump said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'd still vote for me? Well, I can't imagine Anthony Albanese saying anything remotely like that. But you don't want to be in a position where any government feels that, they're unaccountable and that they will inevitably get re-elected, not because they're doing a good job, but because the alternative is so frightful.
We'll talk about Trump in a moment. In the UK, though, Nigel Farage's reform is increasingly viewed as the main opposition to Keir Starmer's Labor. We've seen numerous defections, high-profile defections from the Tories to reform. Here, some recent polling puts One Nation ahead of the coalition, and it's clear that people are spooked by that within the Nats and within the Liberals, and that can be seen in some of the language around immigration. Can you see a scenario where One Nation does win enough seats to surpass the coalition as opposition?
I can't, to be honest with you. I can see a scenario where they could take some regional seats from the Nationals. I could see that. But could I see One Nation winning seats in the cities? I don't personally, but I think no, I don't. But I think they certainly are a threat to the National Party. And of course, you've got Barnaby Joyce, probably the best known National Party leader of our time, has joined One Nation. So now, it's interesting that, Barnaby is not running for New England again. He's going to run in the Senate. So he thinks he's got a, good chance of getting into the Senate as a One Nation senator, but he's obviously a bit sceptical about whether he could win New England as a One Nation candidate. To be honest, I suspect Barnaby could. I mean, he's got a huge personal following up there. But
he also says that this whole saga over the last week has been a recruitment drive for One Nation. Do you agree?
Well, it is certainly helping One Nation, yes. I mean, it wasn't intended to be a recruitment drive, of course. But you see, the problem is you take the immigration issue, right? And, we all know where Pauline Hanson's come from. She's pursued divisive politics all of her time in public life. That's been her mantra. If you chase Pauline Hanson down that alley, that line, you can never out Hanson Pauline Hanson, right? You can't. So if you say, if you support the proposition that immigration is the biggest issue, all you do is give strength to Hanson, and that's so the Labor Party will say, yeah, sure, immigration is an issue and we are managing it and we're doing this and that and we're not going to be demonising one group of the community, or another, and so Labor will put it in a context. But if the National Party or the Libs say, no, immigration is the single biggest issue, and people are going to say, oh, well, yes, it is, yes. Well, we better go for Hanson then. So this is the problem. I mean, they chasing Hanson down, trying to outdo her on her issue is simply not going to work.
Sean Kelly made a similar point in a piece he wrote earlier in the week. Is this bigger than chaos in the coalition? Is the country at a juncture?
Well, the country's at a juncture all the time, right? I don't think the country is divided in the way the media writes. I mean, one of the things you've got to do in politics and even in the media is you've got to recognise that what is dominating the headlines in the newspapers and the talk shows and online is not necessarily what is dominating people's thinking. I mean, you remember during the when before Albanese called this Royal Commission, and he was reluctant to call it, and I understand why he was. There was the last Test match was at the cricket ground, and I was there standing next to a very, very experienced politician. A guy. I won't say who it was. I don't. But he'd been in politics for a very long time, held high office, and he said to me, Malcolm, how many people in this stadium, 40,000 people, are really anxious or concerned about whether Albanese calls a Royal Commission? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? And he said, I don't think any. And I agreed with him. But if you watch the media, switched on to any of the news sites, you'd think that was the only thing people were concerned about. I mean, you've got to political leaders have got to pull themselves out of the bubble and focus on what Australians are, what their main concerns are, and they are naturally the issues I mentioned. I mean, if you want to talk about national security, yes, of course they're concerned about terrorism. Of course they're concerned about anti-Semitism, but they're also concerned about what's going on globally. They're concerned that Donald Trump, is threatening to invade Greenland or, impose swingeing tariffs on Canada and says the international rules-based order is dead. And, they're concerned that the world looks chaotic and they want to see some leadership on that. So, there's a lot of things other than just what is in the, particular issue du jour. So it is hard. And I mean, unfortunately, if you spend your time in that Sky News bubble, you're going to be right off the beam.
So who can do that for the Liberals? Who can lead
Well,
them?
Who can do it? Well, I mean, anyone can do it.
Who can do it well?
Yeah, well, that is a good question. I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I don't want to. It's that the pool of talent is not enormous at the moment. I mean, one of the issues with our parliamentary systems, Nour, and this is a problem we have. Our parliaments are small, and as a result, your talent pool, even if you're in government, is not enormous. I mean, the Liberals, Liberals and Nationals altogether currently have, I think, 43 members of the House of Representatives. That's not a lot of people. And they're talking about Andrew Hastie and Angus Taylor. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, both of them have got strengths. I mean, Taylor didn't distinguish himself, obviously, as economic spokesman in the last election. Hastie's younger, more untried. Who knows? There was a selector, right? If it was like cricket, there was a selector.
Who would you
They'd be looking
select?
and saying, they'd be saying, surely there's some other people we can pick a team from.
But does that not say something? You're former leader, you were prime minister, and you're struggling to name someone who can lead
Well,
the opposition.
I just don't see. I don't see any. I mean, they look at mate. They might be. Who knows? There are all sorts of people. Anthony Albanese was never seen as a. I mean, he could well turn out to be one of the most successful Labor prime ministers of our time. So, I mean, I don't think many people would have had that in his future. 10 years ago. So who knows?
And we know now there's a lot of speculation about a spill. The reports are that the moderates are rallying behind Sussan Ley. Do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, how many moderates are there left? Really? I mean,
do you think though that with her as leader, or who do you think rather can improve the party's standing in the eyes of the Australian public?
well, that's you've asked me that before, and I don't know. So I'm sorry. I mean, I just don't know. I think it's. I'm not sure that changing the leader is going to improve their situation. It's not as though there's a. I mean, if you look at, for example, if you look at when Abbott was prime minister, and as Abbott's position became more and more when he became more unpopular, every week or so there was a poll saying, who would you prefer to be leader of the Liberal Party, Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull, Julie Bishop, someone else, and you could say, you could at least say, well, if Turnbull was more popular, whether that was I'm not saying it was a good decision to make me prime minister or not, but I think it was, but others will disagree. But there was some evidence there. I don't see any evidence that a switch to Angus Taylor or Andrew Hastie would make a big difference. Neither of them are particularly well known. So Sussan had a relatively low profile before she became opposition leader. And so it's a long way to go. But having said that, sometimes you get people that are almost completely unknown. I mean, Kelly Sloan, no one I suspect outside of her electorate knew who she was until she became opposition leader in New South Wales. She could do very well. I don't know.
And these things can take on a life of their own.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jacinda Ardern. I'm not comparing Angus Taylor with Jacinda Ardern, let alone Andrew Hastie, but she was literally completely unknown until 6 weeks before the election in New Zealand, where she became prime minister. So it's a dynamic business politics, but certainly the state they're in is dreadful, and they are, if there was an election tomorrow, Labor would increase its majority. Now, that's, I would think, quite substantially increase its majority. So that's pretty bizarre.
I do just want to ask you about some of the big things that have happened internationally. You mentioned Donald Trump earlier. Can I get your response to some of the scenes we've seen on the streets of Minneapolis over the recent days, and the ICE shooting of a US citizen?
Well, these are shocking scenes, and Australians, will be very grateful that they're living in Australia and not in the United States, let alone in Minneapolis. Ultimately, what we're seeing in America is people being concerned, rightfully concerned, that the rule of law is under threat. That they are, and that is, and you've got, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton coming back into the political discourse on this issue. I mean, and thousands and thousands of people marching. So this is America is going through a period of enormous change. In some respects, it's almost it feels unrecognizable. So we have to, obviously, we can deplore what's happening, but we just have to make sure that things like that do not happen in Australia, and defend our democracy and rule of law in our country.
Should the Australian government, should the Australian Prime Minister be more vocal in pushing back against Donald Trump in the United States?
Well, I thought Mark Carney's speech in Davos was outstanding, and I'd encourage everyone to read it and watch it. Yes, I think the Australian Prime Minister needs to give a similar speech, which is essentially acknowledging that the world has changed. I mean, you said earlier that I've described Donald Trump as a bully. I mean, that is not a criticism of him. That is just a statement of fact. I mean, that is he makes no bones about that. He says might is right. He says power determines what happens in the world. It's not a question of criticizing Trump or sledging him or calling him names. It's simply recognizing that he is a tough guy. He is a bully. That is his approach he will stand over people where he can get away with it. But when there is pushback, then he will negotiate. Trump is shaking the very foundations of the US alliance, and where Carney is right. And this is the thing that we can't keep on pretending nothing has changed. And there is a tendency in Canberra to do that. I mean, as Carney said, integration with America, dependency on America, Trump sees that as leverage. So we've got to be clear-eyed about it. And unfortunately, I don't think we've yet heard from our government the type of honesty and the clear, rigorous analysis of the world as it is, as we've had from the Canadian Prime Minister.
Anthony Albanese has repeatedly made the point that he doesn't want to comment or remark on everything that Donald Trump says and does.
Yeah, well, that's probably wise, I think. Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, you can't. I mean, yes, you don't want to be a running commentator. That's true.
So how would you suggest the government strike the balance there?
Well, I think what you need to do is, and Carney gave a good example. I mean, Carney doesn't comment on everything Trump does either, but what you need to do is to give a speech. I mean, this is a good time to do it. Australia Day is over. Everyone's back at work. This is the time to really have a tour of the horizon, set out, this is the world we live in. I mean, one of the things that Albanese has got to explain is why we are becoming more and more dependent on the United States via AUKUS and sending them so much money in circumstances where we have no certainty of ever getting any submarines, and putting everything into this US alliance at a time when the Americans are saying quite clearly, you have got to do more for yourself. You can't rely on us. I mean, it's as though the Australian government's view of the United States is one. It's as though it's frozen, in the happy days of Joe Biden, or maybe even, back when George Bush was president. It literally is not acknowledging the changed reality. And I think the problem that Albanese is going to face with this, if I may say so, is that, I mean, he's not going to be troubled by the opposition because they are in la la land, right? So he doesn't have to worry about them. But Australians can see that the world has changed. Australians can see that the United States under Trump is not the United States we'd grown up to know and respect and work with. And they'll be looking to their leader to explain how we deal with that and how we relate to that. And we've heard nothing on that. So I think his Albanese and the government in particular, and the government in general, is facing a moment where they're going to have to come to terms with reality. Now, we have to be brutally honest about the changed approach of the United States. Recognise that we're in a very different transactional era. Recognise that we have a president who does not pretend to share the values of any of his modern predecessors.
Malcolm Turnbull, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nour.